Something big is happening in Canada right now. It's called the Century Initiative. Now, this plan could change the country in ways you wouldn't believe, and it's already in full swing.
The second thing that becomes obvious when looking at the Century Initiative is that Canada is already on pace to exceed 100 million people by the year 2100. In fact, if we keep up this current pace, by the year 2100, at a minimum, Canada's population will be 120 million people. At 40 million people, where Canada is at right now, our country is on the brink of collapse.
So what does this mean for everyday Canadians? Well, higher housing costs, more crowded cities, and strained public services are just the beginning. And if you think this sounds like a nightmare, then you're not alone. Many are worried this rapid population growth will lead to lower quality of life, despite what the Century Initiative promises.
Let's talk about the Century Initiative again, bro, because I'm telling you. Okay, now we pissed off India. So where's this 100 million people coming from all of a sudden?
A plan that was dreamed up by Dominic Barton, the former head of McKinsey Global, who is a Canadian, and him and a BlackRock finance bro of his, they came up with this idea to basically grow Canada's population to 100 million people as fast as possible. Their reasoning is that, so we can compete with the economic titans of the world like China and the United States. Many people don't realize Canada is a tiny country, but we have the 9th biggest economy in the world. We have historically high immigration rates right now in terms of both absolute and relative numbers. And this is an enormous reason for the housing crisis that we have right now. So if we keep going forward at the current immigration rates that Trudeau has set in place, we will double Canada's population, I think within 24 or 23 years from now, which is mind-boggling.
Okay, so what exactly is the Century Initiative? Started in 2009 by businessman Dominic Barton and Mark Wiseman, this project aims to boost Canada's population to 100 million by 2100. They believe that a larger population will lead to more economic activity, more tax dollars, better social services, and a stronger global presence for Canada.
It's the largest population increase in 66 years, a staggering sudden jump.
We are growing at about 4 times the historic rate.
In the same year the country's population crossed the 40 million mark, the additional number of people living here between July and September is up by more than 430,000. The majority of newcomers aren't permanent residents yet.
I would argue, given that the situation we're currently in, I would go as far as to say that the federal government has lost control of these inflows.
Among those coming, foreign students, temporary foreign workers, and migrants. Many more people competing for social programs, jobs, health care, and housing.
If you're living in an immigrant community where you need to compete for rental housing or for jobs with the newcomers, then it's much less clear what the benefits are.
Earlier this month, the federal housing minister acknowledged it might be necessary to change the rules.
We do need to continue to look at reforms to our temporary residency programs. We've seen a significant increase in the numbers of the international student program.
In Toronto and elsewhere, the population increase has put upward pressure on the cost of rent, for example. Canada's housing supply falling behind the growing demand as those without permanent status arrive on temporary permits with a hope to stay.
This government's continuing introduction of ad hoc programs that provide easier pathways to permanent residency.
The federal government carefully regulates how many permanent residents are admitted, about 500,000 per year. But some are calling for the government to start restricting the number of foreign students, for example, as a way to moderate the population increases.
Absolutely. I think we do need to be looking particularly at these non-permanent resident programs, which don't have a cap, which can kind of grow for any variety of reasons in an unplanned way. I think we do need to look at scaling those back.
Economists told me they're not surprised at this number, but everyday Canadians may be shocked at this late year surge in population, especially at a time when finding an affordable place to live or a family doctor can be so challenging. Sean O'Shea, Global News.
The brains behind this plan include Dominic Barton, a former McKinsey director and Canadian ambassador to China, and Mark Wiseman, a senior executive with BlackRock. Other key figures are Goldie Hyder from the Business Council of Canada and several high-powered executives and policy specialists. These folks have big corporate and political connections, and they're all pushing hard for the population boom. The Century Initiative has some big ideas. Here's a few highlights. A national childcare strategy, employment programs for seniors, more part-time and flexible jobs, increased immigration targets, infrastructure improvements including affordable housing and public transportation.
The leadership of the Century Initiative is a perfect mosaic of Canada's elite. Politicians, lobbyists, consulting group executives, banking executives, you name it. Almost every single person involved in the Century Initiative project, A, have close connections to the current Liberal government, but also, B, have a deep financial interest in maintaining aggressive demand for housing in this country and an endless supply of labor which will suppress the wages of Canadians. But who really does benefit from Canada rapidly expanding its population to 100 million in such a short time frame? Is it the average Canadian, as the Century Initiative would like us to believe? The average Canadian who right now is struggling to buy a home, to start a family, and to put food on his table? Or is it the very top of society? The people who run massive businesses who benefit the most from suppressed wages? The people who already own lots of real estate and benefit from a shortage in housing? The Century Initiative is very close to the Trudeau government. That's why you see the Liberals carrying out the Century Initiative's plans.
I'm pleased to share that Canada intends to maintain its target of welcoming 485,000 new permanent residents in 2024 and 500,000 in 2025. Starting in 2026, the number of newcomers we aim to welcome will stabilize at 500,000, allowing for a sustainable population growth.
Dominic Barton, the founder of the Century Initiative, is extremely close to Justin Trudeau. While Barton was the chief executive of McKinsey, one of the world's largest consulting firms, Trudeau appointed Barton to be the chair of the Advisory Council on Economic Growth. After his time as chair on the Advisory Council of Economic Growth, Barton was appointed by Trudeau to be Canada's ambassador to China. Under Justin Trudeau, the federal government has given tens of millions of dollars to McKinsey to assist the government in basically governing the country. A lot of the taxpayer money that Trudeau gave to McKinsey happened while Barton was leading the consulting firm. Oh, and other McKinsey executives sit on the board of the Century Initiative right now. Oh, and wouldn't you just know it? The government department responsible for giving the most amount of taxpayer dollars to Dominic Barton's McKinsey and Company during Justin Trudeau's leadership happened to be Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, $24.5 million given by IRCC to McKinsey to help them draft immigration policy. According to the CBC, McKinsey's influence over Canadian immigration policy has grown in recent years without the public's knowledge, according to two sources within IRCC. Both spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to speak publicly. So take this in. Dominic Barton, who started the Century Initiative, was the head of McKinsey and Company, while Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada gave $24.5 million to McKinsey to help them draft immigration policy. This group has immense influence over Canada's immigration policy, and we're seeing it play out as we speak. One of the Century Initiative's partners is the Globe and Mail. You will routinely find in the Globe and Mail's opinion section articles promoting the Century Initiative or articles written by the Century Initiative's leadership. As far as we can tell, there aren't many politicians calling out the Century Initiative by name. One of them happens to be Quebec Premier François Legault, as is written by CTV. Premier François Legault says Quebec is saying no to the Century Initiative, a plan by an influential lobby group to increase Canada's population to 100 million by the year 2100. It is in Quebec that we decide the number of immigrants in Quebec. And to be very clear, there is no question of following the approach of the Century Initiative regarding the growth of immigration. Other politicians, however, don't seem that interested in calling out the Century Initiative. But think about this, for example. As we've already discussed, Canada simply can't keep up with the demand right now. Our infrastructure is crumbling under the weight of demand. And when it comes to housing, perhaps the most acute problem in Canada right now, we know, for example, the arguments being put forward by the federal government that immigrants who come to this country will build the homes for everyone else isn't actually proven to be true. We already knew it was fake when they said it, but now we have the data. As you can see here, labor shortages in the construction area have risen faster than any other sector. Furthermore, in the GTA, the place where the Century Initiative wants to put 40 million people, no one is actually buying the condos being built right now. According to an article in the Toronto Sun published this past weekend, condo sales in the GTA are at their lowest levels in a decade, prompting builders to shelve dozens of new condo projects for the time being. Urbanation, a condominium market analyst, reports 40 condo projects totaling 13,000 units expected to be available this year have been delayed. The Century Initiative, This influential lobbying and charity group has spent far too much time in the shadows making drastic changes to our immigration policy. It's time Canadians know who they are and what they're all about. Because even though it looks as though Canadians do not want to pursue this reckless path of immigration, that's the path the Century Initiative has chosen for all of us.
They want to increase immigration numbers significantly. For example, by 2026, they're aiming for around 500,000 new immigrants per year, and it's already started. In 2022, Canada saw a steep increase in its population, and 2023 was even more explosive with 1.1 million new arrivals.
A local resident by the name of Natty, she recently took to social media in which she accused newcomers, mostly from India, of defecating on the beach and then burying their excrement in the sand.
There are Indian families that dig holes and put tents and poop. They do it on the beach now, and they did it off my backyard. There was like 3 different families of maybe 25, 30 people that came for barbecues. They would set up right on the fence of my backyard. I seen them digging the hole, and I seen them put the tent. When they left, there was poop. That happened 3 separate times. I've had to yell at people for on the borderline property line of my backyard. And yes, it was Indian families. So that's not false. You can check my town's page where they say there are Indian people pooping on our beach, because they're digging holes and they're pooping and putting tents up because they don't want to go to the washrooms. And I'm here to fact check that, because that's not a lie. So
Natty's video has gone viral. Most of the comments are, as what you would imagine, people expressing.
But here's the kicker. This plan has got some serious issues. Canada's already facing housing shortages, skyrocketing real estate prices, and high living expenses. More people means more pressure on our infrastructure, healthcare, and social services. Think about it. More people competing for the same number of houses, doctors, and jobs. It's like a recipe for disaster.
The mentality of the population. So one of the things that they get into, which was touched on briefly in one of the points that we mentioned, is removing unconscious bias and, subtly saying, having a more welcoming environment. So what that really means is they need to educate Canadians, to ensure that people warm up to the idea of 100 million people actually coming into Canada by the year 2100. That's a lot of people coming in.
Well, and what the Century Initiative seems to forget is that a lot of Canada is cold and dark a lot of the year. Living in a cold and dark environment like that, it has impacts on your health, especially your mental health.
Well, and that's it. And, the other thing that they say at the end of that video is we want to, have incentives for people to have kids. But notice that the incentives are not for a parent to stay home and raise the kid. It's the incentive is, well, let's get you to have a kid and then quickly hand it over to somebody else to raise
while you get
to work.
Right, because they want government-run daycares. The government can raise your kid better than you can, apparently.
Well, and they need taxpayers, right?
Of course they do.
So every working mom is a new taxpayer for the federal government. So you are no longer, it flips everything around in that the government is no longer working for you. You are then working for the government. Your whole purpose is to earn taxes for the government.
I mean, it kind of is now, but it gets so much worse when the population explodes in that manner.
Right. And the Canadians that are here are just supposed to suck it up and deal with it. And think about the transformation of focusing on immigration to actually transform Canada. It will be nothing like the Canada of today if this were to actually happen, because you are almost tripling the amount of people in Canada within less than 80 years now. So the cultural destruction that will actually have to this country, you can't even begin to calculate that.
And this is a huge issue in Quebec, where they are worried about being erased, like having their French language, their French culture completely erased by this influx of newcomers.
Right. And I think a I think that gets lost a lot of the time because, you know, just like Quebec doesn't really care about what happens to the rest of Canada, a lot of Canada doesn't really care about what happens to Quebec.
This initiative is gaining traction because it aligns closely with the Liberal government's policies. Trudeau's election campaign checked off almost every box on the Century Initiative's list. But here's the thing, not everybody's on board. The Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois have voiced strong opposition. They argue this plan could drastically alter Canada's culture and overburden its resources.
The Century Initiative is literally a nonprofit organization founded by Dominic Barton, the former global head of McKinsey, who I believe is or just was the Canadian ambassador to China. He's very good buddies with Trudeau. Him and his other buddy, who is a BlackRock finance bro, I think he runs like BlackRock in Canada, they came up, their brainchild was the Century Initiative, which is essentially let's grow Canada to 100 million people as fast as humanly possible. And that's where all of these immigration targets are coming from.
No way.
In the Trudeau government. And it's absolutely nuts. So if Dominic Barton was here, he would say, listen, we need to start pursuing a like quantity over quality kind of strategy for Canada, you know, because in his mind, I've heard stuff from him. It's like, we need to compete with the United States. We need to compete with China. I mean, I would argue that Canada's whole strategy is a quality of life, not a quantity of life strategy. And that's why people love this place.
Canada's already struggling with a housing shortage and unaffordable real estate prices. Increasing the population rapidly without a corresponding increase in housing supply could make this situation even worse. More people means more demand for homes, and if the supply doesn't keep up, then prices are going to skyrocket, pushing homeownership out of reach for a lot of Canadians.
Century Initiative that he talked about. This makes sense now.
Yeah.
If you want to get by 2100, the year 2100, you want to get 100 million people in this sucker?
This is
like,
what you do.
You're not even going fast enough. If my math is correct, you got to put your foot on the pedal. Which means what? I guess it's good to own something in the GTA.
Anywhere. Where are they going to go? Like London, Hamilton, Kingston. Like eventually they got to start going. They got to start going to places that there's less people.
Mayor's never going to be able to afford a place in Wilmot. But this is the thing. This is like when I was telling you about the guy on the boat up in Muskoka or whatever, where it's like the locals got to move even further to afford to live because they can't even like make enough money to afford a place that's $350.
Canada's infrastructure is not equipped to handle such a massive influx of people in such a short time. Public transportation, roads, and other essential services are going to be stretched thin. Now, this could lead to increased traffic congestion, longer commute times, and deteriorating infrastructure quality. Not to mention the healthcare system is already under pressure, with long wait times for procedures and a shortage of medical professionals. Realistically, adding millions more people to this system is going to exacerbate these issues, making it even harder for Canadians to access the care that they need. This is going to easily translate into longer wait times for surgeries and specialist appointments, not to mention overcrowded hospitals and increased stress on healthcare workers. The quality of care is going to diminish as resources are stretched, impacting both new arrivals and current citizens.
Every retiree. In 2035, it slides to 2. We stall, or worse, decline. The second route leads to a bolder future, one that includes better early childhood supports for those who want bigger families and increased immigration to draw in the talent we will need. The outcome, our economy, keeps pace with the current growth levels. A bigger Canada will go beyond what is expected if we plan thoughtfully and proactively. We will create better job and investment opportunities, including at our universities and colleges, critical centers for lifelong learning and developing our future leaders.
Our country's potential, its people, places, and progress will soar farther and faster if we start now.
What's next on this journey to a bigger, bolder Canada? Take the first step with us.
First thing I noticed in that video was how they showed so many big open spaces with no people in it. They showed a field, they showed a forest, And even when they showed cities, it was very uncrowded. These are the people who want to triple our population, so they want to hide the fact of how crowded it would be. They showed something, I'm not even sure if this is a stock image from Canada, but it looked like something in our far north. They showed the Confederation Bridge to Prince Edward Island. I think that's what that is. Yeah, that's not where new immigrants to Canada live. They moved to Toronto, Greater Toronto, Vancouver, and to a degree, Montreal. They don't go to the far north. They don't go to Prince Edward Island. Have you ever driven in Toronto traffic or Vancouver traffic? Have you ever tried to buy a house or even rent a condo in Toronto or Vancouver?
More people means more consumption of resources and more waste. Now, this could have significant environmental repercussions, including increased carbon emissions, pollution, and strain on natural resources like water and energy.
Tech is actually a really good success story for Canada's immigration policy. There's over 1 million people that now work in technology within Canada. And these are high-paying jobs where people contribute to the tax base and help fund the social services that we all need, like in healthcare and with infrastructure and with education. If we choose to pause the number of immigrants that we're bringing in, or if we choose to lower the number, we're going to rapidly age as a population. And the number of people who are going to be using social services is much higher than the number that are going to be contributing to the tax base. If we continue on that path, everything becomes a problem.
But you must have some empathy for the conversation on this side of the table about potentially slowing it down. I mean, these problems are real.
No, of course. I mean, I live in Vancouver. Our rents are exorbitant. It's a really hard environment. I think some of the cost of living challenge is, related to things outside of immigration. If you look at even the Levels plan now, 500,000 immigrants is only 1.3% of the population. So these problems are beyond just bringing people into to the country. There is inflationary pressure that's unrelated to the immigration targets that we're setting.
I feel like this has become a little bit of what came first, the chicken or the egg. It's like, it's great, you can bring people over and you found someone that can assist you, but what do we do when we have nowhere to put them? If they're coming over and they're taking all their savings and you're saying, hey, I want 7 months up front, what quality of life have we actually improved on?
But if you look at the other provinces, so Moncton, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, our areas, rent's cheaper. Being able to buy a house is more realistic compared to the Toronto market, the Vancouver market. So it's easier, or maybe we need to encourage them to go to different areas in the country instead of and they seem to always come to Toronto.
I agree.
Rapid population growth can lead to greater economic inequality. As competition for jobs intensifies, wages could stagnate or even decline, especially in low-skill sectors. This would disproportionately affect vulnerable populations, widening the gap between the rich and the poor.
Speak about coming over now versus the experience that my mom and my grandma had. Completely different. Completely different. There's definitely something wrong. Like my mom, who made significantly less than I do, was able to afford a house in Pickering. I'm probably going to be shut out of the housing market completely and be a forever renter, which I'm fine with, but the reality is something has to change. And I think the only way we can look at what needs to change is to take a step back and slow down. I have friends who are paying 7 months up front to secure housing. I work full-time and part-time, so I completely understand the struggle.
You work full-time and part-time to afford your place?
To just afford life in general. Yeah. It's not just rent, basic necessity. I was at the grocery store and butter was $7 and I was like,
integrating a large number of immigrants quickly can lead to social tensions and challenges. Differences in language, culture, and values can create divisions within communities, potentially leading to misunderstandings, discrimination, and social isolation. The rapid pace of immigration might overwhelm social services designed to help newcomers integrate, such as language classes, job training programs, and community support services. This could hinder the successful assimilation of new residents and strain community cohesion. Additionally, there might be resistance from some segments of the population who fear cultural changes or feel that their own social and economic opportunities are being threatened.
I'm going to clarify something and I'm going to fact check it. I used to live on Mosley Street. My house was on the strip, which meant my house, my backyard was huge, and it backed onto that sand parking lot. That's one of the first ones off, like at the main end. Yes, there are Indian families that dig holes and put tents and poop. They do it on the beach now, and they did it off my backyard. There was like 3 different families of maybe 25, 30 people that came for barbecues. They would set up right on the fence of my backyard. I seen them digging the hole, and I seen them put the tent. When they left, there was poop. That happened 3 separate times. I've had to yell at people for shitting on the borderline property line of my backyard. And yes, it was Indian families. So that's not false. You can check my town's page where they say there are Indian people pooping on our beach, because they're digging holes and they're pooping and putting tents up because they don't want to go to the washrooms. And I'm here to fact check that, because that's not a lie. So it happens. So I'm tired of people saying that the people pooping on the beach, like that's what they do back home. We are not back home. We are in Canada. As a local, I refuse to let my kids dig in the sand on Beach 1. And you guys are saying all the tents are gone? No, they're not. No, they're fucking not. The beach is full of tents. Full. And this is not including in the side areas of the beach. There is little treed areas there that is like mini forest, but it's cleared. So people can put up camp there. That is where they're still 100% doing it. And they are still 100% doing it on the beach, but more discreetly. It is still happening. This is nothing that's going to change. People with that mentality will not change it. So people need to stop arguing with me and acting like this isn't happening. This is not just 3 years ago. This is today. This is this week. This is still happening. The tents are still up. The people are still coming.
The Century Initiative is undoubtedly a bold and ambitious plan with the potential to reshape Canada significantly. While its proponents argue that it's essential for long-term economic growth and global competitiveness, the potential risks cannot be ignored. Housing shortages, infrastructure strain, healthcare overload, environmental impacts, economic inequality, and cultural challenges are all serious concerns that need to be carefully considered